welcome to our special event, Africa Rising, an event that we devote to the promising land of Africa. I'm Tian Wei in Beijing. Both the African Union 2063 agenda and the 2030 UN Sustainable Development Goals point to collaboration as the key for development. However, what about Africa at a time when the global pandemic and geopolitics are becoming increasingly complicated factors for the world? Will Africa be able to reach consensus within itself and also to work with others to rise and thrive? We're going to ask those questions and get inspirations from our panelists from all over the world. This forum is hosted by CGTN think tank and co-hosted by the Carter Center, the Shirley Institute, the Bridge Tank, China EU, South African Institute of International Affairs, the Dialogue of Civilizations Research Institute, and the Russian-Chinese Analytical Center. Before we go to meet our panelists, both here in the studio and joining us online, let's take a look at this first.
Sub-Saharan Africa, home to more than 1.2 billion people, harbors boundless opportunities and resources on land and in the ocean. The world's fastest growing population is unlocking a massive mobile telecom market, fueling an online retail business boom, and giving rise to future forms of education. But developments do not erase challenges. With almost 4 out of 10 Africans still living in extreme poverty, food security and healthcare remain unattainable for many. The blow from the global pandemic risks moving the region further from reaching its vision of prosperity. How shall Africa overcome these difficulties? What role can China-Africa cooperation play? The United Nations 2030 Sustainable Development Goals and the African Union's Agenda 2063 have drawn a map for the continent's development. Now a test of wisdom for people to turn vision into reality.
Thumbs up. Yes, indeed. We hope the Africa will be the land of promising future. Joining us in this discussion, we have both here in the studio our panelists from China and the African continent, and also online from different parts of Africa. May I have the honor to introduce Mr. Zhang Yongpeng, professor from the China-Africa Institute. Good to see you. I know you lived in Eritrea for quite some time.
Yes, yes.
Good to see you here in Beijing. Ms. Xu Xiuli, Dean of the College of International Development Global Agriculture of the China Agricultural University. Good to see you.
Thank you.
Meanwhile, joining us here in the studio, Jules Dezhang, who is the General Secretary of the African Chamber of Commerce in China. Good to see you. Love that little decoration over there. Very special. And joining us online, we have 3 guests with us. Elizabeth Sidiropoulos, who is the Chief Executive of South African Institute of International Affairs. Good to see you. And Gert Krobler, former South African ambassador to Spain, Japan, and Madagascar. And last but not least, we have Atif Chowdhury, who is the independent research scholar. Welcome to all of you. May I start by asking all of you, why do we invite you here? In other words, what about your story with Africa? Professor Zhang.
Yeah. You know, the story I have experienced in Africa, and especially in Eritrea, because I was there and I worked for the Chinese embassy in Eritrea for 2 years. From
Eritrea.
Yes, Eritrea. I was there. I worked for the Chinese embassy in Eritrea and in charge of the work of choosing the local students to go to China to conduct their study as the postgraduate students. When they complete their studies, usually 2 years or 3 years in China, and they go back to their own country and to work for the government and for as some merchants or various kinds of careers. And one of the good example is a musician who was sent to study in Shanghai, one of the Shanghai musical institutes. And when he got back to Eritrea, and he had opened several classes and to train some of the singers and the musicians for the local people and make great contribution to their education, local education. I think
so now you go back, you can have free concerts, I'm sure.
Yes.
A lot of the students that have benefited from the program. What about for you, Professor Xu?
Okay, thank you, Wei. As you all know, that agriculture plays a very important role for agriculture development, and 60 to 80% of employment rely on agriculture. And according to the World Bank, the contribution to poverty reduction on agriculture would be 3 to 4 times than other sectors. So in 2011, we started to initiate a program called Simple Technology and Big Harvest in Tanzania. And what we did do, we just introduced the labor-intensive technology, like we encourage them to use the local improved seed, improving the spacing and the seedling, more thinning, more seedling, and then they quickly improve their productivity, base of productivity, by 3 to 4 times. And it is very effective, and it's easily to improve the confidence of the local farmers, and they are so happy. So I think we start from simple things, and then we can working together to find more solutions for China, Africa, agriculture development, and furthermore for industrialization, for poverty reduction, and so yeah.
You heard your 2 Chinese colleagues, Mr. Jie Zhang.
Yes.
What about for you?
Well, for me, like you see,
which country are you from originally?
I'm from Cameroon.
Good to see you.
Thank you very much. Actually, for us, I am more involved into the industrialization of the continent. So most of the critical aspect is electricity, energy. And for the past 5 to 6 years, I've been involved in setting up joint venture between Chinese companies and African companies. The idea is pushing the development via joint ventures and partnership by setting up local industries. As you all know, agriculture is like 60% of African GDP. Whatever we produce is around 60%. So, but we can produce and export if we don't have energy, right? Like you know, I think the access rate is around 26% in Africa. So some countries are still going through that aspect. And from our studies, we know that without energy and electricity, Africa cannot reach its full potential. So we have been involved in setting up all kinds of projects, building. Last time we were completing a 10 megawatts in Somaliland, where we wanted to also give access to electricity, because we knew that region is very impacted by weather or food starvation we discussed earlier. So all these aspects are things that get us involved.
I see.
And we're trying to do something happen.
Let's have more inspirations from our panelists joining us online. Elizabeth, you seem to be quite busy over there. Tell me where you are, South Africa, and what ideas you are bringing today to our panel and discussion.
So greetings. I send you greetings from Johannesburg, the commercial capital of South Africa, and certainly I would argue probably the commercial capital of the continent. And I suppose picking up on the comments of the last speaker, what is absolutely essential for Africa as we move into towards Agenda 2030, to the year 2030, and certainly making progress towards 2063, is development. So a lot of the areas that I'm interested in also as a researcher are around how Africa's voice and agency is translated at the global level. But you need to have stronger economic and developmental progress and an environment in those countries to be able to actually also be more effective in your agency. So one of the key challenges that Africa has is we don't have manufacturing. We don't have significant industrial sectors, with the exception perhaps of South Africa and some of the North African states. If we want to see our people move beyond poverty, we heard the figures about 4 out of 10 living in extreme poverty. We need to create job opportunities for them. These opportunities can come through external investment, in particular in various sectors, whether that's in agriculture, in specific manufacturing, whether it's in the services industries. We can look at tourism, we could look at more broadly the leisure industry and so on and so forth. But it needs to also be homegrown. It's not just about foreign investment, it's also about creating a larger African middle class that drives private sector initiatives, whether it is in building, in construction, or whether it's in building shoes, or building intermediate products that can fit into global value chains and regional value chains, so that we have things to trade. I think that's important.
What about for you, Mr. Globler?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for the opportunity. I have been a career diplomat my entire life. I retired about 3 years ago. And amongst others, served in Angola, the United States, the UK, Germany, and I was ambassador of South Africa to Spain, Japan, and Madagascar. And in all this time, I have always focused on economic diplomacy between South Africa and all the countries I served, but you can never delink that from Africa, because South Africa is an integral part of Africa. Africa is rising. Africa, but it has many challenges. But Africa needs to interact with all its international partners. And of course, China is playing a very important role to achieve the Agenda 2063, which is our strategic framework in Africa for future growth, prosperity, and stability. So that's my focus at the moment. And I must say, I've been finding the work I've been doing at the Institute of Africa Studies at ZJNU in Genoa incredibly fascinating and rewarding.
Thank you, sir. And Mr. Chowdhury, tell me more about what story you are bringing to the table today that you think is important case studies for us to inspire upon.
Thanks, Wei. You know, I've developed a very strong passion for the intersection between sustainable development and peace and security issues. You know, I previously had the opportunity to work on Gulf of Guinea maritime security issues in a variety of capacities. I was first a legal intern with the U.S. Coast Guard, and then later I worked as part of a team that works on maritime security issues as part of a consulting team. In my last position, leading the Carter Center's initiative on Africa-U.S.-China cooperation for peace and development, I had the honor to work with a variety of African partners, including with my dear colleague Elizabeth and Saya, to organize a series of Track 1.5 dialogues and workshops. And these dialogues focus on issues such as sustainable development, corporate social responsibility, COVID-19 response, public health, women empowerment, peace and security, and so on. Through all these engagements, one theme often cropped up, and that was peace and security issues are intricately related to sustainable development. Economic distress fuels instability, which in turn hampers economic development throughout the continent. And I think we've seen that, you know, during the COVID era, a variety of conflicts seem to be expanding. The Libyan conflict has resulted in a boon for smugglers. We've seen the Sahel conflict affect countries as far south as Burkina Faso. And rates of piracy in the Gulf of Guinea continue to skyrocket during this pandemic. The IMO reported at least 40 attacks since the start of the year. And the economic and human costs have been staggering.
You talk about, once again, talents, agriculture industry, and then for the other sectors to work together, the clean energy, and also for cooperation, economic platforms to be established among various African economies. How should we identify what the priorities are? Because time is limited, money is limited, resources limited, particularly at a time when you have COVID-19, which is a global pandemic, threaten all the possibilities. Mr. Zhejiang, your thoughts?
Well, like I said before, I think the priority should be first giving access to energy, because what we are facing today is farmers cannot go back to farm their land to grow their plants, so they cannot produce food. So with access to energy, like solar energy, for example, we can extend the time they use per day to be able to sell their products. if I take an example, you have a country where at 6 p.m. it's already pitch dark, it's going to be very difficult for someone who already grow or farm from 9 to 4 p.m. to have enough time to sell whatever they produce. So with solar energy, we can actually tackle two issues. First, it's cheap access to energy and electricity. And second, we can help this social entrepreneur to have more economies, then generate more profit.
Elizabeth, it seems that Dijon is trying to challenge, the traditional thoughts of let's work on political cooperation, let's work on the economic platform, because according to Mr. Dijon, there is a shortcut, and let's work on those global agenda issues. Maybe that could bring us a new possibility.
Yeah, I don't think the two are mutually exclusive. I think the points that he has raised around clean energy are fundamental to Africa's development. And I think the COVID crisis creates an opportunity for us that we shouldn't be thinking about energy in the old ways of dirty energy, but all of this money that is being mobilized to help economies come out of the pandemic, we can actually use it for green energy, for greener energy. And that actually is critical then for everything else that we do in the economy, whether we're talking about industry, whether we're talking about banking. And I think COVID really is an opportunity rather than a challenge for us to do some leapfrogging on things that we wouldn't have necessarily thought about a few months ago. There's already many more people in Africa who are using digital platforms to purchase things. So e-commerce is important. The digital economy is growing in importance. But we need energy. So absolutely, I'm on the same page as my colleague from Cameroon on this in terms of the priorities. And of course, the other point that he made around, and I think colleagues have made about agriculture, agriculture has so many other possibilities, because apart from just the basic farming, you can also use that as an opportunity to create agro-processing and link it up to regional value chains. And so that's about adding value, and we need to add value in African economies.
But the question really is, if I could be frank here, how much will it be able to solve the problem? Yes, we love innovative ideas, but when we have a tremendous challenge such as poverty, extreme poverty, such as even hunger because of pandemic and its consequences, how should we prioritize? Can the innovative idea or the quote-unquote shortcut be able to solve some of the basic needs of the population? If I can, shall we have Mr. Chaudhary with us?
Yes, I think that's a very good question. As my colleague Elizabeth mentioned, that there shouldn't be kind of a mentality of where you can either have these kind of these infrastructure projects that are in energy, that are in ports, seaports, airports. That's not necessarily in conflict with initiatives that are kind of more local based, things that like microfinance or small businesses. So I think, the continent, given the vast needs, you have to make progress in both areas. And that's one thing I've seen too, just with my conversations with our African partners. They do see these infrastructure projects as investments in their country's future. So I think you have to make progress.
Both fronts. Ambassador Grobler, is it possible?
The situation with Africa is Africa has made solid progress over the last couple of decades. And Africa has a dream. Africa has a dream to bring about Agenda 2063. It's a more prosperous, stable, Africa-driven process. So great progress was made. There was also great progress was made with the Millennium Development Goals, which has now moved on to the SDGs. But in this process has come to a halt to a large extent as a result of COVID-19. And the point I made earlier on, it is vital for Africa to work with its international partners. But before they get there, Africa also has to get its own house in order. What we would like to see from the African Union, what we would like to see from African countries in their interactions also with international partners is that they work in a proactive and a coordinated and with a one-voice approach, because this is going to be vital in dealing with all the issues that my fellow panelists talked about.
You've been talking about is political consensus, whether it's political consensus within African countries or Africa with your partners like China. Ms. Xu, of course, you are here in China. You work with Africa. You're not deciding on anything where the Africans are deciding on themselves. So how can we prioritize what is the most important point?
Thank you for your questions. Actually, I have the same question from Tanzania high-level officials in 2015.
How did you answer them?
Office,
you're not telling me agricultural development because you're going back to your own point again.
No, just listen to that story. And he asked the same question. He says, okay, I'm working in the president's office. And the Ministry of Health tell me that health is the priority. And the agriculture sector tell me agriculture is the most important. Infrastructure tells me that infrastructure is most important. So how can we deal with the priority?
By the way, that's also the prime minister in China also have to face. All the ministers saying our area is the most important.
But I just want to ask one question. When the 60 or 80% of the poor people still rely on agriculture, how could you escape that sector? And please relate to the SDG. The first one is no poverty, and the second is zero hunger. And both of them are relying highly on agriculture. So that's the point there. But I don't think that a country could achieve development just rely on agriculture. So we call it agriculture-based broad development. Based on agricultural development, and then gradually you can move to industrialization. And that's the gradual process.
But at the time of the pandemic, we are still seeing the impact of it.
Yeah.
So will there be enough efforts and enough possibility to work on agriculture, particularly agricultural collaboration?
I think that varies in different countries.
Tanzania, for example.
Yeah, for Tanzania, actually, we have daily contact with our colleagues in Tanzania using WeChat, e-commerce, all those things, digitalization approach. And according to the message from the local field, they tell us that actually the farming work starts already. And they go to the field and they working together, because in Africa there are so much challenges. Every 4 years they have a pandemic in different way, Ebola or that. So for them, I think, you know, that's just one challenge for them. The most important is how to survive, or how to get the money. And basically, you know, 80% of their work rely on the informal sector. So, so they have to move around, and that's now in Tanzania, it's open, and they walk around.
Ms. Sidiropoulos, if you are listening, what is the key here?
Agriculture is very important, but we're also seeing in many countries across the continent a move to cities. And urbanization brings with it its own particular infrastructure challenges, but also challenges around being able to get these people to find jobs. And hopefully not just jobs in the informal sector. So that's about how do you create industries and build up industries that can absorb some of these migrants into the cities. And that's very important for many countries. And lastly, that I think the rest of the world is moving so quickly in development, in digital economy, cyber issues and so on, that we cannot take the approach of a linear approach, which says we go from agriculture to industry to services to you know, the new age economic sectors, the digital sectors. We probably have to move on all of these at the same time with different emphases depending on the particular conditions of each country. So South Africa has a huge informal sector, but also has a very sophisticated financial and digital economy. Okay? We have to deal with the problem of jobs. We have to create more jobs for people who are semi-skilled. That's about our manufacturing. That's also about our tourism sector and so on. And there are other countries that are similar. But let's not forget, let's not get caught behind again as a continent where we're constantly trying to catch up. with where the global economy is going. And I think that's very, very important for us to consider when we're looking at our policy options as individual countries, but also as regions and as a continent.
How would you respond to that, Mr. Xu?
We talk about the same thing, I think, just in a different way. You know, agriculture is very important for poor people, but, you know, based on that, industrialization or all those job opportunities in the cities is also very critical for the local development. So I don't think that a very different.
So I can see how you are answering the questions coming from the Prime Minister. And what about for Mr. Zheng? Tell me more about what do you think are the priorities?
I think priority should be a comprehensive perception. It cannot be decided by a single aspect. For example, the infrastructure is critically needed by the African countries, and the poverty, the solution for poverty, and the human resource training, such and such. All of these could be priorities, but most basically, I think the economic problems should be solved first. For example, the innovation of business. Try to encourage the youngsters, the young people, the youth to create their business, to find out opportunities to become rich first for themselves, and then serve the country, contribute to the development of their own nation, their own country. And some of them, I think, should be uncovered by the government policies to go abroad, to go into their neighboring countries, to create business. And by doing so, and this is a way of the African free trade agreement zones, the whole continent are the free one. Various kinds of the productive or people-to-people resources could flow freely, right, so that the economy could be motivated. I think by doing so, and one of the other important aspects is the international cooperation. Development of African countries cannot lack the international cooperation.
Every one of you has a huge map about the priorities. And everything needs to be done. Everything needs to be checked. But as we know, on the ground, it is very difficult. Everything you do. Yeah. Because it is not just about plan. It's about really implementing the plan. And therefore, I think one of the most eligible questions I should ask for every one of you would be, who have you seen that have in fact implemented the plan? Well, what did it take for them to do that in Africa? Ambassador Grobler, you earlier talked about that.
Thank you very much. You actually made a very valid point on the issue of priorities. Africa needs a transition or transformation in infrastructure, agriculture, education, digital economy, trade, industrialization, investment, education, human skilling, in all those areas. And I think the vital part of it is, and I want to repeat the point. First of all, Africa within itself must decide these are the things that we want to prioritize. And then secondly, they must talk to their international partners, whether it's FOCAC, whether it's TICAD, whether it's the European Union, and see that the involvement of those countries in Africa is aligned with the objectives of Agenda 2063. That must be the starting point.
And now, particularly, you have a pandemic that's having a huge impact on every economy. It has a huge impact on the changes of plan of every economy, and also has a huge impact on all the countries that the African continent could cooperate with, because those economies are also suffering themselves. So I guess we are having a very complicated picture rather than our wishful thinking, if I could be blunt here, Mr. Ambassador, briefly to respond to that.
You know, Africa has been making progress. If you look at the African Union and the reform that's taken place to bring on board not only the regions, but to bring on board the private sector, progress has been made. And I think a very good example of coordinated and a coordinated approach and coordination by the AU has been Africa's response to COVID. There was a very well coordinated response within Africa to COVID. Now, why can't that be taken further in terms of prioritizing the key objectives? And I believe that is going to happen.
Okay.
And with the support of the international partners, there are many of them. Elizabeth earlier on mentioned urbanization. Urbanization is one of the key issues, a planned urbanization in Africa. We could learn, these are just a few examples where Africa needs to talk to China, and we are talking. In fact, the next FOCAC meeting between Africa and China is being planned for Senegal early next year. And all these issues are on the table.
Okay.
So I hope and I'm very confident that a lot of these issues we just raised will be discussed with China at FOCAC, but also, of course, with all the other international partners.
Mr. Chowdhury, about who to learn from and what to learn about. I'm sure there's not one size fits all. China certainly could be of some reference, but there are other countries too. Tell me more about what do you think are some of the most important things Africa can learn, and actually Africa can be inspirations of to the others too.
So I have a little bit of a bias. I was born in Bangladesh. My parents work for BRAC, the NGO. If not the best, just one of the best NGO cultures in the world. I mean, NGOs in Bangladesh have been instrumental in building up the country, particularly after the devastating 71 war. And they fill a lot of the gaps that the government historically couldn't fill, but nowadays is gradually filling, whether it's in education or public health. So I think, obviously, you can't just transpose the Bangladeshi NGO scene to different African countries, right? Every country has its own particular issues with civil society development. But I think looking at, if I can be bold and call it the Bangladesh model of how NGOs can kind of help fill in some of the gaps, I think that could be tremendous for a lot of African countries. And, you know, I've had the pleasure of working with several African NGOs in Ghana and Nigeria that participate in our workshops. And the potential is there. The human capital for African NGOs is just phenomenal. So I think if civil society can be strengthened, I think a lot of the development that we talked about on the ground level, things that aren't major infrastructure projects but are kind of more small scale and local, I think that could be really jump started with this.
African continent as a whole has been handling COVID-19, the pandemic, relatively better than many of the developed economies. Now, Ms. Xu earlier talked about that African continent, particularly some countries, have experiences from time to time to deal with pandemic, and that has provided rich experience and also the public basis of understanding. How much do you think, Mr. Dejean, that all of us should get inspired also from the African stories, at least until so far, in terms of fight against COVID-19? And what can African economies work on based on this very important achievement, I would say, so far?
Well, I think we are not out of the wood yet. Some countries are still experiencing, like South Africa, they are still going through the pandemic. So we shouldn't say that the continent has fought or pushed back the pandemic. But that being said, I think what government should learn, and as a lesson, is to be able to set up their own medical and health industry. Because we discover being involved in a lot of government support and supply during the pandemic in terms of PPE. I think African governments understood that it's important for them to also be able to produce the minimum. So this is going to go back to what we said before, Elizabeth said before, about the local manufacturing. A technology like producing masks shouldn't be something that will take 2 weeks or 1 month to import from China, for example. So we are starting to witness more and more government requesting us to help them set up their own pharmaceutical industry, PPEs industries, because this has been a great lesson. If Ebola was something that they felt like, okay, this is out of our hands, out of our reach, COVID-19 showed that actually with the minimum manufacturing industry, you can find a way and to protect yourself. So this is the most important lesson of this pandemic.
Ms. Sidiropoulos?
I'd like to add to what Dijon has said around COVID-19. If there's one thing that it has highlighted, and that is also relevant for the discussions we're having about what priorities individual countries should have, is that while this is a health crisis, those countries that have better systems and better governance processes actually come out better. And this is a global thing, not just in Africa. So a health crisis is also a governance crisis. You know, is the political system working well? Is it able to mobilize the hospital sector? Is it able to mobilize testing? Is it able, as Dijon has said, to mobilize, to repurpose manufacturing in a country that is doing, so in South Africa we've had companies that were doing X, and all of a sudden they had to produce ventilators, and they repurposed. They began producing ventilators or PPEs. Do we have a system that actually can coordinate within countries on that basis? And I think some countries, both in Africa and other parts of the world, have come out not completely unscathed, I think, but with some really positive stories to tell. And certainly South Africa is one of those, and I think generally the African continent, of course, from a health perspective, has among the lowest mortality rates for COVID. And there are lots of reasons, and people are still investigating that to understand that better. But we cannot emphasize enough the importance of systems and processes. And lastly, in terms of the coordination and building up African collaboration on common problems, I think what's also been extremely positive is the fact that we've built up a common platform to procure pharmaceutical products, medical equipment, and so on and so forth. So that it makes it easier, and we can buy in bulk as a continent. And I think that's been one of the great innovations to come out of COVID. And as Gert said, I hope we can really take this forward and learn the lessons from it as we move into the post-COVID era, so that we can cooperate better. That cooperating together doesn't mean that I lose out. It's not a zero-sum game. If we work together, we gain more together. And that's the same for trade and developing agricultural and manufacturing of agriculture.
Ms. Xu.
Yes. You know, Elizabeth mentions a system. Actually, in the last a decade, we're working closely with Tanzania for this kind of a system. Started 2011, we're working with the local farmers, you know, to improve the productivity, the local maize productivity. But later, after 5 years, considering the future of the project, we think that we, you know, as a Chinese, we are always, you know, external supporter, but how to support the local development agency and how to facilitate their own development agenda. So we're working closely with the local government from regional level to the, you know, district and the township, and then to the village level. So we invite them to China. We also send professors and even government officials to the local site. And finally, we found that not only the government, the local university should play a very important role. So we're working closely with the Sokoine Agriculture University. The most important thing is how to facilitate the synergies in Tanzania among the government officials and the local universities and also the local communities.
How?
So that's we need to design several activities. For instance, we encourage the professors in university to go to the field. to learning from the field as well to support the farmers. Actually, during the pandemic, I think the COVID-19 period is really a very big attack to them, and basically they closing. But in last month, they already started to moving. It seems that there's not much impact.
So before we go, I would like to have every one of you, as the traditional goes, about one takeaway. If there's one thing that you think the audience today, not only sitting here in our Beijing studio, but also those in the African countries that are watching our event today, that can take away with them, what would be that idea?
Key takeaway is that if you've got the government, together with the broader civil society, actually needs to be working in tandem to identify priorities within each country. And I think one of the countries that's done it really interestingly well is a country like Rwanda, in terms of its economic development. But I think a country like Kenya, for example, has done really amazing stuff in the area of IT and apps and mobile banking and things like that. But it is about the synergies, and government cannot do it alone, and it needs an enabling environment in which private sector and civil society can work together effectively to
Okay, Mr. Dijon.
Yes, from one sentence, I think Africa should rely on international cooperation to set up what is called the necessary manufacturing and industries that they need for their own sustainability.
Ms. Xu.
Youth leaders in Africa for the Africa is the future of Africa.
Ms. Chowdhury.
Peace and security requires human development, and that can be achieved through targeting the socioeconomic causes for conflict.
Very abstract, but certainly that could be advice. Professor Zheng.
Yeah, try to encourage the economic innovation under the sound policy of the government.
Ambassador Grobler.
I just want to say that Africa is rising. Africa has incredible potential, and there needs to be a coordinated, one-voice approach from Africa in dealing with its international partners, and that's the way forward.
Thank you so much for all of your wonderful input. The time is so limited. I know you have great ideas and great examples to share. But for now, I want to thank all of you here in the studio and joining us online. Thank you for taking your time and sharing your insights. Certainly, the African continent is a land of promise. We know that. We are not just talking about that. And we know it will be a great example for many of us around the world to see how to develop and at the same time how to coordinate within itself and with all of us. Thank you for being with us.